Good day, everybody. This is Joshua Piñano, and for today's discussion, we will be talking in how to use Jamovi in statistical analysis. And with no further ado, let us all start our exploration for today. So, at the end, let's state first the objectives after this discussion. At the end of this seminar workshop, you are expected to be able to identify the appropriate statistical tools for analyzing a quantitative data. And after that, you are able to utilize the Jamovi software effectively in processing and analyzing your data. So, what is statistics? Statistics is the science of collecting, organizing, analyzing, and interpreting data in order to make decisions. Statistics are very useful in fields such as education, health, and analysis. This is source came from Larson R. and Farber during the year 2020 2012 Elementary Statistics Picturing the World 5th edition Person Education. And there are types of data sets. And let us first define on what is data. Data consists of information that is coming from observations, counts, measurements, and responses. And we have the population. The population is the collection of all count outcomes, responses, measurements, or counts that are of interest. It means it is the entire population. The parameter, it is a numerical description of a population characteristics. For sample, it is a subset or a part of a population. So for example of that, if I am living in Malungkay, I am considered as a subset or a sample because I am a subset or a part of a population. And in statistics, it is a numerical description of a sample characteristic. So, what are the two branches of statistics that is often talked and it might be familiar to all of you and some might not, but let's dig deeper. So we have here the two, which is the descriptive and inferential. So for descriptive, it is the branch of statistics that involves the organization, summarization, and the display of data. While in inferential, on the other hand, is a branch of statistics that involves using a sample to draw conclusions about a population. So these two branches of statistics will be our topic for um, this session, and we will be knowing them better as we progress. So there are types of data, the qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative data is consists of attributes, labels, or non-numerical entries. For example of that is the name. That is example of qualitative data. And in the context of research, qualitative data refers to um, those those works or theses that doesn't involve tabulizing or just involving to expressing it in descriptive ways such as in the RRL, and you often encountered it during your earlier years, especially during senior high school. For quantitative data, on the other hand, it consists of numerical measurements or counts, whereas this is the tabulating your data or displaying your data where it involves numerical descriptions and representations. So, of course, we have here the four levels of measurement, categorized as nominal, ordinal, interval, and lastly, the ratio. So let's tackle first on what is nominal. In a qualitative data, which are categorized using names, labels, or qualities, and no mathematical computations can be made at this level. An example of this is age, sex, marital status, those etc. that can be categorized with no mathematical computations. For ordinal, from the word itself order, it is a qualitative or a quantitative data which can be arranged in order, rank, but differences between data entries are not meaningful. So these are ordered, but not the ranks or the position in ranks are not bearing. So for interval, can be ordered data and meaningful differences between data entries can be calculated. And where zero entry simply represents a position on a scale, an entry is not an inherent zero. Zero because zero does not mean none, but just a placeholder, label, or value, not a real absence. So for ratio, similar to data at the interval level, with the added property that a zero entry is an inherent zero, wherein a ratio of two data values can be formed so that one data value can be meaningfully expressed as a multiple of another. So let's dig deeper. Here is the quick example in identifying the level of measurement. First is we have the nominal, where it network affiliates and fills words PA, it only represented through labels. While in ratio, the 2009 American League home run totals by team. It's only by team, just categorized can be ordered, but the bearings are not simply categorized. For interval, where the bearings are categorized since the New York Yankees World Series victories through in years, and for ordinal, through days. Top 5 ranks for the TV program from 5409 to 5109. So these are the examples or numerical representations for the levels of measurements, which is the nominal, ordinal, interval, and the ratio. So, in order to perform that in your Jamovie, you only have a two steps. First is entering the data to the Jamovie app and identifying the levels of measurements. So, I will be providing a Google Drive link and that you can be able to click right there so that you can be able to visualize it on how to properly do it. So next is the Cronbach's alpha. This Cronbach's alpha is a statistical tool that is used to measure the internal consistency of reliability of a set of items in a test, questionnaire, or scale, indicating how well the items consistently measure the same underlying construct. These are very useful if you like to test if your research questionnaire is really consistent in aligning to your desired goal. So this Convex alpha is very useful. So but before, there are assumptions in Convex alpha that is very useful to observe. First, items measure a single underlying construct, which is undimensionality, and items are positively correlated with each other. Data are continuous, strict assumption, or treated as continuous, common for Likert scales. No major measurement errors or badly worded items that violate item consistently. So, another video for finding a Cronbach's alpha can be found in this link. You can be able to just click that and you will get to know on how I perform it in Jamovie. And you might try it too. Okay, so proceeding in the frequency distributions. We have here the frequency distribution table, and it shows the classes or intervals of data entries with a count of the number of entries in each class. Second is the frequency count of a class. It is the number of data entries in the class. And the relative frequency of a class. It is the portion or percentage of the data that falls in that class. We have the equation relative frequency is equals to class frequency over sample size and represented as small f over small n. So relative frequency of a class is the sum of the frequencies of that class and all previous classes. Note, the cumulative frequency at the last class is equal to the sample size, which is the n. So let's proceed in constructing frequency tables using the continuous or interval/ratio data. And the step 5, constructing frequency distribution tables using nominal slash ordinal data. So I have here the Google Drive link. You can be able to click that so that you can be able to see and how I perform it in the Jamovie. So with no further ado, let's start in graphs of the frequency distribution table. And we have the histogram and bar graph, pie graph and donut, the QQ plot, and more. You can use any application for your graphical representations of data in this aspect. And I have provided here three. First is the most famous one, the Jamovie. Second is the Google Sheet and SPSS and more. So in this part, this I have here the sample graphical representations from Jamovie, Google Sheet, and SPSS. So for Jamovie, it is scaled in a light blue, while in SPS, it is in gradient dirty brown, and for Google Sheet, it is lively and vibrant since it involves different colors. But if it is suit to your convenience, and then it's very okay. So let's have the descriptive measures. Descriptive measures and measuring central tendency are numerical descriptions that identify the center, the middle, or the typical value of a distribution. These are the arithmetic mean, weighted mean, median, and mode. These are the most common. We encounter it in our early years, the statistic, which is the mean, median, mode, where mean talks about the all average, the median from the middle, and the mode is the most frequent. So measures of variation describe the amount of dispersion or spread in a dataset, indicating how much the data values differ from the mean or from each other. These are the range, variance, and standard deviation. So, in descriptive measures, while the measure of central tendency will tell you where the data are located, summarizing data by identifying a single value that represents the middle or most typical point of the distribution, measures of variation will tell you how much the data values differ from one another. Variation describes the degree of dispersion or scatter in a set of data, helping you understand consistency, reliability, and how widely values deviate from the center. So it basically tells you that measures of variation measures how the spread the data is. Example of that is the standard deviation, where it can measure how wide the data is in your sample. So measures of position describes the relative standing of a data value by showing its rank, percentage location, or distance from the mean in standard deviation units. These are the fractals, such as quartiles, deciles, and percentiles. It allows you to interpret individual values by identifying their rank, percentage position, and standard score location. So these are the examples, the quartiles, deciles, and percentiles. So now let's proceed to our next statistical tool that we can be able to utilize in Jamovie, which is the box and whisker plot. In drawing a box and whisker plot, you have to find the 5-number summary of the dataset. And after that, construct a horizontal scale that spans the range of the data and plot the 5 numbers above the horizontal scale. And after that, you will draw a box above the horizontal scale from Q1 to Q3, which represent as quartile 1 to quartile 3, and draw a vertical line in the box at quartile 2. And draw whiskers from the box to the minimum and maximum entries. So I have here the illustration. Notice that the line that passes through median is what we call the whisker. And the box that is drawn between the median, which is in quartile 2, are the box. And the edges for the whisker is what we call the minimum entry or the least value, and the maximum entry or the maximum value. So, with no other questions, let us now proceed to our steps in utilizing it in the movie because I want that to be performed also by you. In finding for measures of central tendency, step 7, finding for measures of variation or variability, and step 8, finding for the measures of position. So, in that link is attached on how to create a box and whisker plot. Okay, now that we're already done, let's start in identifying the shapes of distributions. I have here four: symmetric, uniform or rectangular, skewed or negatively skewed, skewed right or positively skewed. So for symmetric, for the word symmetry, it looks like they are identical, where it arranges in the mean from the middle and it has the similar. For uniform and rectangular, there are no gradual changes since it is flat. And negatively left, so therefore the most values are in the left, negatively skewed, and vice versa for the right, if it is in the right. Okay, now let's proceed in discrete and continuous probability distributions. So I have here some terminologies and let's define them one by one. First is the random variable x. What is random variable x, by the way? It represents a numerical values that is associated with each outcome of a probability experiment. You can do this, you can perform this by tossing a coin. So if after tossing a coin, so for example, you have a coin. After tossing it, the the outcome of a probability experiment are your random variable x. So for discrete, from the word discrete, it has finite or countable number of possible outcomes that can be listed. Depends on how many attempts you would like to do it. In discrete probability distribution, it is listing of all possible values of a discrete random variable along with their corresponding probabilities. So for discrete probability distributions, it is you have to list the all possible values of a discrete random variable along with their corresponding probabilities. And for continuous, Hassan has an uncountable number of possible outcomes represented by an interval on the number line. So the number line is in a line that is drawn in horizontal that is mixed with variables and numerical coefficients. For continuous probability distribution, it is listing of all possible values of continuous random variable. By the way, for continuous, we have what we call the finite and infinite. So finite has a countable and infinite is uncountable. I'm just emphasizing that so that you have the idea on how does continuous look like. For continuous years are considered. Months, it is considered. For discrete, it is um, the measure of your waste today. If I'm wrong, I stand corrected. So let's now proceed in normal distribution. For normal distribution, it is a continuous probability distribution for a random variable where x is graphs called the normal curve. So it is very fundamental in statistics that we know the definition of normal distribution. It's okay? Okay. So let's now tackle and dig deeper on the normal distribution. For normal distribution, we have the empirical rule or the famous 68, 99, and 99.7 rule. For data with a symmetric bell-shaped distribution, if we say bell-shaped, it like looks like that. It escalates. And the standard deviation has the following characteristics, so you have to take note. About 68% if the data is within one standard deviation of the mean. If it is in 95%, it has the two standard deviation of the mean. And lastly, if it's about 99.7% of the data, then where it means the standard deviation has 3. So therefore, that is the empirical rule for 68, 95, and 99.7 rule. So observe these pictures here that I have provided. They are weights of newborns that is considered as normal distribution since it shows the normal curve or the bell-shaped curve. So for mean, this one, the inflection points are identified where it escalates or where it shifted. Okay. Now, let's proceed for sampling distributions and central limit theorem. So for central limit theorem, the sample distribution, it is the probability distribution of a sample size or a sample statistic that is formed when samples of size n are repeatedly taken from a population. So when you say it is repeatedly taken, it is represented through population. The central limit theorem, it is the foundation for the inferral branch of statistics. So, the central limit theorem, it if samples of size n where n is greater than or equal to 30 are drawn from any population with a mean, and a standard deviation, then the sampling distribution of the sample means is normally distributed for any sample size n. In either case, the sampling distribution of the sample mean has a mean equal to the population mean. And we have the formula of mean sub x is equals to mu. The sample distribution of sample mean has a variance equal to 1 over n times the variance of the population of and a standard deviation that is equal to population standard deviation divided by the square root of n. So we have the formula of variance 2 over x is equals to standard deviations variance over n, and another for standard deviation. So let's now dig deeper on the central limit theorem. Central limit theorem states that for a sufficiently large sample size, the sampling distribution of the sample means will be approximately normal, regardless of the shape of the population. It also tells us that when we take repeated random samples. So the distribution of the means become more normal, our sample size increases. The mean of the sample means equals the population mean, and the spread of the sample means becomes smaller as sample size increases. And lastly, we can use normal probability methods to make inferences about population means. So here we have the normality test. It is a statistical test that is used to check whether the set of data that is come from a normally distributed population, which is very important assumption for many parametric tests, because in normality test, it is when you have to test if it is appropriate to use statistical tools. So you definitely have to check their normality. So there are three types of normality tests that I have here. First is the normality test or the Shapiro-Wilk test, Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, and Anderson-Darling test, where it is very common and powerful for small to moderate samples, where n is less than 30. For Kolmogorov-Smirnov test with Lilliefors correction, it compares the sample distribution to a normal distribution. And lastly, the Anderson-Darling test, it gives more weight to the tails of the distribution. Okay, now let's proceed. So, let's check for normality of data distribution by utilizing Jamovie. And I have here the Google Drive link of my execution in Jamovie. You can check that. So let's now proceed for confidence interval. In confidence interval, we have here what we call the point estimate, where a single value estimate for a population parameter. Note, the most unbiased point estimated of the population mean is the sample mean. So you have to remember that. We have here in the illustration the interval estimate, where left endpoint and the right endpoint. And the point estimate is between the mean, which is the 130.8. So see, that's how you label your left endpoint and right endpoint. Now, what we do mean the level of confidence interval. So the probability of that interval estimate contains the population parameter. Okay, now let's proceed to utilize again the Jamubi in finding for the confidence interval. So I still provided the link there. You can just click if you have time so that you can be able to know on how did I perform that. Okay, now let's proceed to hypothesis testing. So in hypothesis testing, approaches that uses sample statistics to test a claim about the value of a population parameter to make informed decisions. Statistical hypothesis, it is a claim about a population parameter that can be tested using sample data through the procedures of hypothesis testing. Now, why do we need to test the hypothesis? So the purpose of hypothesis testing is to use a sample data to decide where there is enough evidence to reject or to fail the reject or to fail to reject the claim. Okay, now what are the two types of hypothesis? We have here the alternative and the null. So let's start first with the null. The null hypothesis states that it is a statement of equality involving the population parameter. And as the definition for parameter, it is a numerical characteristic of a population. A hypothesis that is assumed true unless there is sufficient evidence to the contrary. So that is what we know, the null hypothesis. So now let's proceed to the alternative hypothesis. For alternative hypothesis, it is a statement that must be true if the null hypothesis is false. And it reflects the claim that researcher or study aims to support. So, what are the role of statistical hypothesis in hypothesis testing? Hypothesis testing uses sample statistics to evaluate the truth of claims about population parameters. Evidence is judged based on the significant level alpha. The conclusion is either to reject the null hypothesis or fail to reject the null hypothesis. We never accept null if we only fail to reject it if the evidence is insufficient. Okay, so let's proceed the type 1 and type 2 error. Errors in hypothesis testing, which are mistakes that can be made when using sample data to make decisions about the population. So we have here the type 1 error. It occurs if the null hypothesis is rejected when it's true. For type 2 error, we have it occurs if the null hypothesis is not rejected and when it is false, of course. Type 1 error, the false positive, rejecting a true null hypothesis. False alarm are harmful and can lead to wrong decisions and unnecessary actions, especially about safety concerns. And type 2 error, false negative, it is when we fail to reject the false null hypothesis. Missing a problem leads to danger or lost opportunities. Okay, we have now the level of significance. So for the level of significance, you will reject the null hypothesis when the sample statistic from the sample distribution is unusual. Take note of that. You have already identified unusual events to be those that occur with a probability of 0.05 or less. When statistical tests are used, an unusual event is sometimes required to have a probability of 0.10 or less, 0.5 or less, or 0.01 or less. Because there is variation from sample to sample, there is always a possibility that you will reject a null hypothesis when it is actually true. In other words, although the null hypothesis is true, your sample statistic is determined to be unusual event in sampling distribution. You can decrease the probability of this happening by lowering the level of significance. Okay, so by definition, in a hypothesis test, the level of significance is your maximum or allowable probability of making a type 1 error. It is denoted by alpha. the lowercase Greek letter alpha. The probability of type 2 error is denoted by B, the lowercase Greek letter beta. So now let's proceed for the p-value, the probability value of the hypothesis test. The probability of obtaining a sample statistics with a value as extreme or more extreme than 1 combined to be determined from the sample data. So we have here the decision rule based on p-value. To use p-value to make a conclusion in a hypothesis test, compare the p-value with the alpha. If p is less than or equal to a, then reject the null hypothesis. If p-value is greater than a, then fail to reject the null hypothesis. Failing to reject the null hypothesis does not mean that you have accepted the null hypothesis as true. It only simply means that there is not enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. If you want to support a claim, state it so that it becomes alternative hypothesis. If you want to reject the claim, state it so that it becomes the null hypothesis. So the following table will help you to interpret your decision. So you have here to reject. There is enough for the claim is null. There is enough evidence to reject the claim. To fail to reject the null, there is not enough evidence to reject the claim. And the claim is alternative. There is enough evidence to support the claim, and there is not enough evidence to support the claim. So let's now proceed to the parametric test for difference analysis. We have here the one sample t-test, where it is used to determine whether a sample mean significantly differs from a known or hypothesized population mean when the population standard deviation is unknown. So if we can use the one sample t-test if the standard deviation is unknown. Assumptions here is that the sample is randomly selected from the population. The variance is measured on interval or ratio scale. The data come from a normally distributed population, or the sample size is sufficiently large for robustness, and observations are independent of each other. We have here the non-parametric test for difference analysis, where the one sample Wilcoxon side rank. It is used to determine whether the median of a single sample differs significantly from a hypothesized population median when the data are not normally distributed. And the assumptions are the data are paired with a hypothesized median, or one sample are matched to a constant. The variable is at least ordinal, which is rankable, and it has an order. Difference between observations and the hypothesized mean are symmetrically distributed, and observations are independent of one another. So now that we were able to define the assumptions for Wilcoxon signed rank, let's now proceed for the independent samples t-test. It is used to determine whether the means of two independent groups significantly differ from each other. And its assumptions are the two groups are independent, no participant in both groups. So you have to remember that. The dependent variable is measured at the interval or ratio level. And each group's data come from a normally distributed population. So the variances of the two groups are equal, homogeneity of variance, and observations within each group are independent. So let's now proceed to the Wilks t-test. It is used to compare the means of two independent groups, where independent groups means that the independent is not present to both groups. When their variances are not equal, heterogeneous variances. Assumptions: the two groups are independent. The dependent variable is measured at the interval or ratio level. Each group's data are approximately normal distributed. So observations are independent within and between groups. Okay? Now, for non-parametric tests for difference analysis, the Wilcoxon-Rock-Sum test or Mann-Whitney-U. It is used to compare whether the two independent groups differ in their distributions, typically their medians, when the dependent variable is ordinal or not normally distributed. The assumptions of it are The two groups are independent again. The dependent variable is at least ordinal or rankable. The distribution of two groups have the same shape for median comparison. Observations are independent within and between groups. Okay. So for parametric tests for difference analysis, we have the paired samples t-test. It is used to determine whether the mean difference between two related, matched, or repeated measures observations is statistically significant. Assumptions: the two sets of scores are dependent, same participants or match pairs. The dependent variable is measured at the interval or ratio level. The differences between paired scores are normally distributed. And lastly, pairs are randomly selected and observations within pairs are independent from each other pairs. Okay, now let's proceed to the non-parametric test for difference analysis. The Wilcoxon sign rank test. It is used to determine whether the median difference between the two related, paired, or repeated measures observations is significantly different from zero when the data are not normally distributed. And the assumptions of it are: two sets of observations are paired or dependent. Same participants or match pairs. The dependent variable is at least ordinal. The differences between paired observations are symmetrically distributed, and pairs are randomly selected and are independent from other pairs. Okay, now for step 11, hypothesis testing for difference of one sample and two sample tests. And I have provided the Drive link here so that you can be able to know it. Just click it when you feel so. Okay, we have here the one-way analysis of variance, or the ANOVA. It is used to determine whether there are significant differences among the means of three or more independent groups based on one categorical factor. And its assumptions are: groups are independent, the dependent variable is measured at the interval or ratio level. The data in each group are approximately normally distributed. The variances of these groups are equal, which is the homogeneity of variance. Observations are independent within and between groups. So we have here the next is the Kruskal-Wallis test, when it is used to determine whether three or more independent groups differ in their distributions, where typically their medians, when the dependent variable is ordinal or not normally distributed. So the assumptions: the groups are independent. The dependent variable is at least ordinal or rankable. The distribution shapes of the groups are similar for valid median comparison. Observations are independent within and between groups. Okay, did you understand? Now, the post hoc analysis. Post hoc analysis is used when you found a significant ANOVA result, and if you want to know which groups differ. And we have here the two. The two case HSD, most common, it controls type 1 error. Games Howell, best when variances are unequal or homogeneity of variances is violated. Since Kruskal-Wallis is non-parametric, use pairwise comparisons with adjusted t-values, which is the Dwas, Steele, Critchcrow-Fligner. Okay, we have here the chi-square goodness of fit test. It is used to determine whether observed frequencies in one categorical variable significantly differ from the expected frequencies based on hypothesized distribution. So its assumptions are: data frequencies count, not percentage or means. Categories are mutually exclusive. Each case fits in only one category. Observations are independent of each other. Expected frequency in each category is at least 5, or most categories greater than or equal to 5, with no special or very small expected outcomes. So this part, we will get to hypothesize testing for difference of more than two samples. And here, the parametric relationship analysis, the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient R. It is used to measure the strength and the direction of the linear relationship between two continuous variables. And its assumptions are both variables are continuous, which is interval or ratio. The relationship between the variables are linear. Variables are approximately normally distributed. There are no significant outliers and observations are independent. Okay, let's proceed to the Spearman rank correlation coefficient, or the RHO. It is used to measure the strength and direction of the monotonic relationship between two variables when data are ordinal and not normally distributed, or the relationship is not strictly clear. Its assumptions are variables are at least ordinal and can be ranked. Relationship is monotonic. As one variable increases, the other tends to consistently increase or decrease. Observations are independent. No excessive ties in the ranks or ties are handled with appropriate corrections. So let's proceed to the Kendall's Tau B. It is used to measure the strength and direction of association between two ordinal variables, adjusting for ties in data, and is especially useful for some small samples or many tied ranks. And its assumptions are both variables are at least ordinal and can be ranked. Observations are paired and independent. Each pair of scores comes from one subject or case. The relationship is monotonic. As one variable increases, the other tends to increase or decrease consistently. So we have the chi-square test for independence. It is used to determine whether there are significant association between two categorical variables in a population. And its assumptions are both variables are categorical. Data frequencies in each cell, not percentage or means. Observations are independent. Each respondent appears in only one cell. Expected frequency in each cell is at least 5, or at least most cells greater than or equal to 5 with no very small expected counts. Okay, let's now proceed to point by serial correlation. It is used to measure the strength and direction of the relationship between one continuous variable and one truly dichotomous variable, which is binary, pass or fail, yes or no, male or female. And its assumptions are one variable is continuous, interval or ratio. The other variable is generally dichotomous. Two real categories are not artificially split. The continuous variable is approximately normally distributed within each group of the dichotomous variable. The relationship between continuous variable and the dichotomous groups is linear, and observations are independent. So now, let's proceed in hypothesis testing for correlation and association in terms of relationship. So I have here the Google Drive linked. You can be able to click there if you feel so. We have the regression analysis. The regression analysis is the family of statistical techniques that is used to model, predict, and explain the relationship between a dependent variable and one or more independent variables. So we have here the simple regression analysis. It is used to predict the value of one continuous variable or dependent variable based on one continuous predictor or the independent variable, and to determine whether a linear relationship exists between them. Assumptions. The relationship between x and y is linear. Observations are independent. Residuals are normally distributed rather. And the homoscedasticity. Residuals have constant variance across levels of x, and the independent variable is measured without error. Okay, let's now proceed to the multiple regression analysis. It is used to examine and predict the value of one continuous dependent variable from two or more independent variables, and to see how strongly each predictor is related to the outcome while controlling for the others. And its assumptions are linear relationship between each predictor and dependent variable, independent observations, and the residuals are approximately normal, where the homoscedasticity, where residuals have constant variance across predicted values, and no multicollinearity. Predictors are not excessively correlated with each other. Now, step 14 in determining a predictive models from regression analysis. I have here the two links that indicates there. So that ends our presentation for this session, and I hope that I have explained it well and you learned it well again. So in summarizing, we are able to define the descriptive measures, measures of central tendency, tests for normality testing, hypothesis testing, the normality test, and those non-parametric tests that are very essential in learning the statistic course. Again, this is Joshua Opiniano, and once again, mathematics is easy when one learns with enthusiasm. Goodbye!